Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Right. So last week then we started off by using we were using a grid, weren't we, to do a drawing. It's a little bit further than the usual grid we use in that you divide it up into triangles, and we've been looking at reflections and things as well. And I showed you some different techniques of drawing reflections, but mainly we're focusing last week on looking at boats and things, and a range of photographs which are on the website. If you should need another one, if you finish the last piece of work, you can look on the website and find a new photo. I've started a new one today, which I'll show you in a few minutes as well. I'll take you over to the wall first of all. So just a reminder, really, we've been looking at photos a little bit like this in order to look at how water distorts reflections and how to sort of put that forward in our work as well using pencils last week. And then I also published a few of these sheets which I made, or I did actually find a few of these on the internet, but also made my own one to show you. So it's got those techniques out that you can experiment with. So today what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at how to use colour pencils. So the drawing that I did, that you saw me do last week, what I've actually done with that is I've taken a little bit of a shortcut and photocopied it so that then I could work back over the top with the colour pencil straight away without messing about too much. So if you've got your drawing finished, what you can do is you can photocopy it perhaps, or photograph it, lighten it up so that when you put your colour pencils down over the top, it doesn't darken it too much with your original drawing. So I'll show you some of that stuff over on my desk. Right, okay, so this is what I showed you last week, and there's loads of different ways of interpreting and drawing the water. So we had the Van Gogh, we had the Monet just over here, so I'll zoom into that a little bit so we can get a closer look maybe. There we go, and focus. There we go. So yeah, so we had different approaches. We had these kind of broken reflections. We had repeated lines overlapping each other, a bit like Van Gogh used. And I've gone for a little bit more of that approach in today's work. But then we've got over here, we've got again lines, horizontal lines that kind of get closer to each other and so forth. And this was from one of the photographs that we had a look at. Okay, so last week that was the one that I did with you, and I broke down the space using this grid, and then translated it into the drawing using the pencils. A lot of the techniques that I was using for this were actually using kind of dashed lines at an angle like this, and then building them up. So remember, the idea with pencils isn't necessarily that you just shade it all and then that's done. You can layer lots of different marks and techniques on top of each other to get the overall effect that you're looking for. So for example, see if I'm getting any closer. So for example, you can see down here on the boat, I've shaded it to give it the tone and shadow that you can see in the photograph, which I haven't now got in front of me. But I've shaded it, and then I've used these kinds of little dashes and dots and squiggles to help show some of the perhaps worn paint on the side of the boat and in there, and in the reflections. One of the things you'll notice about reflections as well in the water is that they're often a little bit darker in tone than the actual object above the water. So that's something to look out for. And when I was drawing the picture, I also drew, if you remember, the larger shapes first, so that then all of the smaller shapes like the oar and the plank and the sides of the boats would fit inside of there. So it kind of, you start big and you go small into the detail to help you draw it more accurately with the grid. So that was that. And then this week what I did is I photographed it, or photocopied it I should say. So we've got the original just there and my photocopy here, and then I've started to apply some colour over the top of the picture. So you can see it's slightly lighter than the original. I could have got it much lighter if I wanted to, using editing on the computer, but in this case I just went for it. So we're going to look at using the colour pencils to do your drawing next, and I've got this sheet here which you can find on the website. It's got a whole range of different techniques, including ones like stippling, which is using small dots, so you can use multiple amounts of colours to create tone and texture and so forth, by just adding quite a few dots like this, and then applying another set of dots and building them up. Obviously this one's quite a long process using just the dots, but you can blend and mix the colours, and a really famous artist that did that of course was Georges Seurat, who used dots to do his whole painting technique. And this one, which is one of my favourites, which is the scumbling, is where we scribble to create the effect of the blending of the colours and the tones and shadows and things. So literally a very tight controlled scribble like this, and you can release the pressure on the pencil as you go out, and then use a different colour. So I'm using a lighter blue here on top, and then maybe let's try a bit of yellow in there as well. So you know, you can, apart from what we would normally associate with colour pencils, which is doing a smooth amount of shading, releasing the pressure like this, and then applying your blue over the top of that. We can also use a whole range of other techniques to create these effects. So I recommend you having a little, just a little go with some of these techniques on this sheet. You'll find them, as I said, on the website. I've just put them up just a few minutes ago, so you can try that out. Now, this is, here I've got a few other materials that some of you might be familiar with. So first of all, and this is something I could have showed you a bit last week as well, for the pencil drawing, is using a normal pencil here, shading, and basically what this is, it's a paper stick like this, and if you rub over the surface with the stick, it smooths off your shading. So it's called a blending stick, and it's basically just really thick paper. I'm sure I've shown some of you that one. And then these are something worth investing in as well. I've got this one, which is a blender. So if we look over here again, if I see if we can get a bit closer again without it getting too dark. So this one is a blender, and basically it's kind of like a pencil but without any pigment in it, and you can see how the colours, as I go over it, are smoothing out and blending together without adding any more pigment to the paper. So you can get these beautifully smooth effects by using the blender to mix the colours together. So if you haven't got one of those, I recommend getting one of those to try out at some point. Now the other thing that you can try out is I've got one of these, which is it's got a pointed end with a little kind of ball on the top, and you can score or indent the paper that you're working on to create very thin and fine minute lines. So if I just draw a few lines on here, this one is on the bottom of the sheet I just showed you, but a few that they actually suggest that you could put a piece of paper on your drawing and score it with a biro before removing the paper and then colouring over the top. So I'm just going to put a few lines, rough sort of lines on here. You can use it a bit like a pencil, I suppose. And then now I've scored the paper just there, what I can do is use my colour over the top, and this could be very useful if we're doing water as well. And you can see all the scratches will appear quite clearly on the page where I've just indented or engraved or scratched the paper. So really, again, this could be a really useful technique for water and things, and what we've been doing so far with our work. So I've just mixed two colours on there, using my pencils, and then of course you can. I've done this before, but I could also get my blender or my burnisher over the top and blend them, and still got those lovely lines appearing through there. And you can do, as I said, you could do this with a biro pen. Somebody suggested using a biro pen that's run out so that you can still see what you're doing rather than putting a piece of paper over the top and then doing it. You could use something that's sharp to make a really nice indentation. I've also got these tools here, which are like sculpting tools, which are quite also good for indenting. So there's some things for you to have a little experiment with. So if you've got a photocopier at home and you fancy drawing back over the top of your picture, then that's the thing to try next today. As I said before, I've been using these lines that are a bit like this, and I don't know if it's particularly clear on here, but if I zoom in a little bit, yeah, you can just about see where I've been, rather than just plain colouring, I've built this up layer by layer with lots of small lines in colour pencil. So I'm basically doing this to reflect where the ripples and the waves on the water are, just along here, and I built up the layers of colour rather than just graphite on there too. Okay, so that was what I tried out. I did that one last night actually, and then today I started on a lighthouse. So this one is mainly using lines, and I was taking inspiration from some of the Van Gogh stuff that we were discussing on the last sheet. So on this one, we talked about how Van Gogh uses these lines in his drawings and then they translate into his paintings. I've started by creating, and if you're on Elton Hall and so forth, you remember me talking about doing an underdrawing with the colours. So I've used this lovely deep, it's not indigo, it was Delft blue that it's called on my pencils here. There it is, Delft blue. So I'm using a colour that goes underneath, and then I've started just over here on the top of the lighthouse in the sky. I've started to apply some more layers of different colour over the top, and during this lesson I'm going to build all of this up with different colours, so you can see how layers and layers of colours and marks can come together to create a really interesting and different picture, hopefully. So there we are. So that's what we're going to do today. We're working on colour pencils, perhaps with your old drawing, or if you fancy trying something new and going straight into this, then that's the thing to do today. Okay?
Are you expecting us to go over the sketch of last week?
Well, I wouldn't recommend going straight over the top of your pencil drawing,
Okay.
because you'll find the colour pencils will smudge it and it will go a bit yucky. So
Okay.
yeah, it's either take a copy of it if you've got a copier at home, like a little photocopier. You can put art paper in there. As long I've used, this was just the same sort of paper I originally drew on. I just cut it to A4 and printed over the top of it. Yeah. So if you can't do that, however, the best thing to do is probably to have a go at a new photograph. This was the photograph that I've been using for this one, just here. So I'm going to start building up more shadow and texture on there. I'll show you the sky's quite pleased with the sky. So it's lots of directional lines, look, a little bit like what I did with the boat. So the clouds are represented just there by these lines going across the picture, and I've kept them all going in the same direction to give a sense of movement. And then down here towards the bottom I've got these horizontal broken lines quite close together, and then as we come forward I've started to apply lines going in other directions, because we've got all this kind of seaweed in the foreground, which I've then built up with lines going in different directions. So I've varied the texture as we head towards the back of the picture. And the nice thing about the reflection is you've got these little bits of seaweed popping up on the top of the water. You can't see it in here, it's too dark, but just at the top there, or the bottom here, there's loads of little dashes and things where the seaweed poking up through the rock pools and things, which is really lovely. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. So how does everyone feel about that?
A challenge.
So with this drawing, I didn't use a grid on this one. I just kind of went for it on this one. But if you wanted to use the grid again, of course, then that would be, perfectly acceptable and a good way to start, actually. Okay. So what is everybody carrying on with the drawing from last week, or?
Yes.
Yeah.
Copy mine, hopefully.
Sorry?
Then a photocopy mine, like you said, and then.
Yeah. It's a little bit of a cheat, but it's a nice way just to move forward, and it is your own work, so it's a perfectly valid way of working.
I cheated. I traced mine.
I've just ordered some carbon paper, actually, so that in class people can get outlines really quickly, so I can get on with some of the painting skills that I'm going to introduce.
I didn't understand about photocopying it, so I just traced it, and it's completely
Yeah, that's all right.
Got to be Jamie's.
Yeah, go for it. So as you can see, I'm now applying a second colour to the sky. So I started this earlier on, actually using some of the paler blue over this Delft blue that I used for the main under drawing for the colour pencil drawing. So it's a blue, and that means that the overall picture will end up having this kind of blue tinge to it, with the blue underneath, unless I work over it really, really heavily. So I'm just looking at the picture here from a printout that I did earlier, so I can see a little bit more detail than you perhaps can on the screen here of the photograph. But I'm adding in some of my own ideas using very small hatches for the sky. So I'm bringing in some of the oranges and some of the reds on the horizon there.
this evening sort of sunset picture. So I mean, it's quite a lengthy way of working, I guess, using all of these very small dashes in the sky, but I quite like the end result, you know, this kind of very graphic sort of hatched effect in the picture, creating a little bit of a softer atmosphere in the image, and a lot of interest with texture. So we're sort of looking here at how line and tone can be combined together with the layering up of all of these colors. So I talked earlier about blending with a blending stick and scoring and all that sort of thing. I don't do a great deal of that in this particular drawing because I'm more interested in layering up all of the different colors, and line is the main sort of aspect of the picture, line to create texture and tone. So I'm working back in again with a little bit of another color, which is kind of this grey color, grey sort of greeny sort of color that I picked up to enhance the clouds and so forth in the sky. So you see it's coming together quite nicely here. And in a few minutes I then worked on the lighthouse itself. Quite a nice enjoyable picture. My original plan with this was to paint a background before then working back over the colour pencils, but that'll be for the next lesson. So working over a colour background with colour pencils. So I'll use either inks or watercolours or some brusho inks that I've got as well. So I haven't decided on what I'll actually use for that at this point. But this was a very absorbing and enjoyable picture to do. See some of the reds going in. So it's almost like with this, it's almost like a mono print black and white picture, if you like. Or in the 50s they used to and before that they used to take black and white photographs and then hand tint them. So in a sense it's a little bit like that, in that you've got all of these different tones in the picture, which I'm then tinting with the other colours in here as well. So quite a lot of fun. I love making all these little marks there in the background as well. That was me just looking at a little bit of Van Gogh there. Some of the ways that he worked is the inspiration for this, really. The way that Van Gogh uses his marks. I think obviously he uses them in a much more fluid and flowing way, I think, than some of my work here, but some of it's come through. Now I reflected the clouds in the water here, as is in the photograph that you can see there. But the dashes were going diagonally in the opposite direction because we're looking at a mirror reflection in the water below. So you can see me just working around the rough rocky texture of the ground down there. I was a little bit concerned about the shape of the lighthouse here. I needed probably to work into that again a bit later, get it a bit more crisp too. And one thing I did after this video is just change the bottom left hand side of the lighthouse, just to bring that curve shape of the lighthouse down a little bit. Something that, you know, sometimes you spot things after you've been working on them for some time. You suddenly stand up, or you look at it from a different position, or you just look at it with fresh eyes and you spot different things, which is always really nice, because you can then make those corrections if you haven't worked over it too much. So I didn't quite get to the end of this drawing, but it was very satisfying and enjoyable to work on it in this way. So probably, as you can see, there's more contrast in the original one, but then the photograph, you can't quite see on the screen here a lot of the detail that I can see in the photo that I printed off. So, you know, I'm seeing it in a slightly different way than you perhaps would in the photo. In fact, at the photo, you might just think, oh, there's a lighthouse, there's a nice reflection, that's a nice picture. But when you're, as an artist, as a drawer, you're almost bound to look in much more detail at the picture, which is what I was doing here. So I would definitely have worked perhaps a bit more into the clouds. But as you can see, lovely sort of lines and textures that I've added in there. That was me just showing the blending sticks again. So thank you very much for attending this week's lesson. And next week we'll be working over a background with the coloured pencils. Thank you. Bye.